All right, welcome back to the beautiful Pacific Northwest, the land of plaid and coffee. This is David, and real quick, if you are here on YouTube, you can click up on the link, a little eye up there in the video, and you can subscribe. And if you feel like it, and your heart's calling you to do it, to support the old PacWest Bigfoot, please go ahead and follow it all the way through. Not to mention, be entered to win a product from the store on PacWest Bigfoot once every month. So there you go. If you're here on Facebook, go ahead and just hit up there. It says sign up, and you can't miss that. And there it is. And with that, let's just get into this week's PacWest Bigfoot encounter story. Husband and wife tell of Bigfoot experience along Depoe Bay Creek. Hey there, Dave. Thanks for sharing this Bigfoot encounter of mine. I guess you'd say my wife's too. We had along the Depoe Bay Creek back in 1990. It was truly life-changing, truly a life-changing day, that's for sure. My name is Mike, but I'd like to keep the last name out of it, as I still live here in Depoe Bay, Oregon, a place we both have loved since we stumbled across it all those years ago. Why? Well, simply put, I just want to live my life without the questions. Plus, I'm a face that is familiar around town. Another good reason to keep it on the down low, I guess is how we used to say it. So here is my encounter, or better yet, experience, as it lasted more than just a few seconds, like most do, I notice. Finding Depoe Bay. It was actually 1989 when me and my new bride, Beth, decided to take a cruise up into Oregon. We lived at the time in and around Davis, California. Our trip was not just a trip or vacation per se, we were on a mission actually. We sensed the change of wind in California at the time, so much liberalism moving in that we knew to start up a business would be, well, hard to grow and continue with all the crazy special rules for some folks and not for others over time. Besides, we opted to start a business doing something else. Something I would love to mention exactly here, but as I said, someone might catch wind of this, and I know who I am, and I would love to just keep it here. And thank you, by the way, for putting these reports and incidents in story format. We love it, and so do our grandchildren. They live in Brookings, Oregon, where my son and his wife live. We had only one child. Some medical issues came up with us later when we tried again, so that was that. But we could not be more blessed with all of them, truly. But I digress. We are here for my experience with Bigfoot. I know, but I was hoping to give you a bit more to write about as you do, so there you go. We, my bride and I at the time, were looking to dive into photography, and we wanted to open a kind of eclectic shop of sorts too. And as we rolled over the bridge and into Depoe Bay that day, my wife literally said at that moment, "Welcome home, Mike," with a big, huge smile. A year later, and voila, here we are, today, still. Bigfoot in Depoe Bay. Personally, I do not consider Davis or the Sacramento, California area the so-called Pacific Northwest. Some do, but not me. It's nice down there, and the vineyards heading out Highway 12 are just, well, wonderful to drive through. And yes, a stop here and there for a tasting. But something about the rugged coastline of Oregon, and especially the Depoe Bay area, just caught our attention the second we crossed the bridge. Of course, I had heard of the legendary Bigfoot, and while my wife believed it was a possibility that they existed, I, however, well, I was on the other side of the fence that believed they did not, and were something of myth and legend, and there they would remain forever. But it didn't. We settled in, got a business set up and running, and we're pretty successful right out of the gate, too. The only thing we were not prepared for was the storms that came through here and there. That was something that took us a couple winters and springs to get used to, that's for sure. But the hiking, beachcombing, fly fishing, the creeks and nearby river, and of course fishing the Pacific Ocean, it was so worth a nasty storm here and there, we thought. I found hiking some trails just outside of town fun and took up photography that Now it covers our walls throughout the house. My favorite was hiking up and along Depoe Bay Creek. Talk about dark and just Pacific Northwesty. It was the first year there, 1989, when I would get a bit of a scare and a new view and belief on what is out there in the woods in the Pacific Northwest, specifically along the Oregon coast. I have heard the stories from others, not just on the PWB here, about encounters and habitations along the Oregon coast over the years, but from friends and the occasional tourist passing through. My encounter, well, it was scary, but at the same time surreal, exciting, unbelievable almost. But it happened. No, my wife was not there, but I will share something real quick that she had heard on a hike not far from where I was at. I was at a few weeks before my encounter and visual. Grunts and running. Well, I prefer walking like you, Dave. My wife is a trail runner or fitness walker. You know, that really fast-paced walking or running thing. She does it on trails too, and that day, well, she got a bit of a scare. She said she was moving pretty fast for about half a mile. Finally, she was drinking a ton of water, so she needed to make a stop for a second. She was finally ready to go again when she heard movement off to her right, about, she said, 40 to 50 feet away from where she stood. Then she said she heard a grunt of sorts. Thinking it was a black bear, she started moving again and yelled out, "Go, bear!" really loud. The bear at that point seemed to be charging her way. She freaked out and crossed the creek while still hearing all the commotion through the tall brush and thick forest along this part of the trail. Suddenly, it stopped. Again, as she heard a grunt and what sounded like a large tree snap to follow it. She was scared, yeah, but I'm telling you, she came straight back telling me she encountered a Bigfoot. For the next few weeks, it was all she could talk about, even when we went fishing along the bay. She would look out over the hills of Depoe Bay and remind me again, for the 100th or more like the 1,000th time, what she experienced. Personally, at the time, I was wondering why she was so sure it was a Bigfoot, but I listened, like a good husband I always try to be. Well, now I'm a believer. Bigfoot. They're real, you know. There are a ton of hiking trails around Depoe Bay today, especially when you start heading inland. Back in the day, there were some, but not as many as there are today. I love the deeper trails inland. They were and are pretty stereotypical, full of evergreen pine trees of all kinds of species. The brush is so thick it would give Trump a run for his money when it comes to building walls to protect us. The mornings can be rather dark, eerie, and all because of the heavy fog that moves through the area early mornings, making things damp, cold for a while, and truly thick with a moodiness, if you will. Seriously, though, we love it. By mid-morning in the spring and summer, all the fog burns off rather fast, but still the forests of the Pacific Northwest are dark, most at least, and even during the sunniest of days it can be that thick in places, so thick in places that it stays that way all day, seriously. And that goes for Depoe Bay and the creeks and forests that surround this beautiful gem along the Oregon coast. That morning I started out pretty earlier than I usually do. I had some work to get done that day. We were going through some new ideas for the shop, and Beth was looking at getting started with photography herself to add something new and cool to what we offered. So I needed to be back in a couple hours. Trust me, I did not need a couple hours. I was back in less than an hour. I had to drive out to the trailhead I wanted to hike that morning. It would be a short hike, more like an extended morning walk than anything. But I needed the walk to keep me healthy and clear my head. Not to mention, I love the woods here. Even today, even after getting a glimpse of the impossible. Bigfoot, they are real, that's for sure. Mr. Brown, outside of town. It was pretty typical low fog, thick forest kind of morning, as I explained. But there was light and I could see a bit into the thick of it. I wish I had not for a few seconds there, but then again, I'm glad I did. I'm now part of a pretty unique club of folks who have seen this thing or these things. I started my walk at a pretty fast pace. I consider it fitness walking, personally. I noticed about a couple of 100 yards up the trail along the creek the silence of birds and bugs. As we know, birds and bugs are the loudest, are their loudest in the morning, or at least when nobody else is around. That is for sure. I stopped for a moment, listened to the creek that was still moving, but could not hear anything else. It was a bit spooky, to be honest. I decided to keep moving, thinking that it was either a cougar or a black bear running around, or perhaps another person was about. But no, not even close. 100 yards further, I stopped again to take a drink of water and tie up a shoe that was a bit loose. The sounds were still gone, except one. Footsteps and the cracking of brush underfoot. Yeah, walking, or footsteps. This is what I heard. I did yell out that I was nearby just in case it was a person. I did not want to frighten them or anything. This was not only a real popular, this was not a real popular trail, but people hiked it or ran it here and there. So I was not too surprised hearing footsteps not far away. However, it was a bit weird to hear them off trail. The footsteps stopped, but I stayed right where I was for about a minute, waiting for someone to pop out and walk or run past me and saying good morning along their way. Nothing. Nobody. Not a single peep from anyone, or anything for that matter. The bugs and birds remained silent. At that point, I was starting to wonder about my particular situation. I was unarmed, and there was apparently someone out there who was not making themselves known to me, even after a second shout out letting them know I was there. I decided to walk back to my vehicle and call it a short walk instead. The footsteps started up as mine started up. Talk about freaking out. I got the feeling whoever it was knew I was there. They had to, anyway, because I stated the fact. And now, well, I was being shadowed or paralleled as I walked faster back to the trailhead in my car. The footsteps and crunching of brush sped up as well to the left. At some point, well, I don't know if it is you simply do what they call manning up or what, but I did. I eventually stopped for a few seconds to catch my wind and to let whoever it was know I was not afraid of them, although deep down inside I was a bit frightened, but also annoyed. I think you'd have been too. I decided to start walking again, and I was about 100 yards away from the trailhead in my car when I finally saw a shadow of a figure walking briskly and easily through the trees off the trail about 20 to 30 yards. The sun was starting to cut through the low, dense fog, and the glow of the light was apparently casting a backlight of shadow off a really tall person. It was a person, I thought at first. It had to be. It was walking upright, and the silhouette was literally that of a person. I started to get more worried, thinking this person was there to menace or even maybe rob me. It is not unheard of along trails in the Pacific Northwest this close to a town or city to be mugged, even in a small town. Rare, but it does happen. But without realizing it for a second that I'd lost sight of them, I finally focused hard through the trees and mist. And there it was, one hand on a limb, hunched a bit, and looking right at me, as still as a statue. It was a Bigfoot, Dave, a real live, giant, scary, ape of the forest Bigfoot looking right at me. The color, at least it seemed to be, was brown, light or dark. I cannot really tell, as it was as the shadows still hid many of the features at the time. I wish, or maybe not, but a part of me wishes I could have seen it more clear. But there were some features I could make out. Its arms were long. The branch or limb was pretty far up off the ground it held onto. I could never reach that, even standing on my tiptoes. The hair on this thing too, Dave, it just hung off its arms, it seemed. And the side that was holding the branch, well, it looked like it was a thick, gangly mess of hair just flowing in the light breeze, it seemed. Like I said, I wish I could have seen more, but not sure if I could have handled much more, to be honest. It was massive, tall, and its head seemed to sit right on top of its shoulders. It kept staring at me, or at least in my direction, not moving at all. I was getting scared, really scared. My heart was pounding out of my chest and my head was starting to become light. I knew I had to get to my car, and fast. I believed I was about to pass out. I started moving, and so did this Bigfoot, paralleling me, or shadowing me, if you will. I was freaked out, so much so, I started running. Not a second later, I heard what seemed like a yell, not a howl or a holler of sorts. That thing was literally yelling as if it were mad at me, or simply warning me. At least that is what it felt like. Back home. "You were right." That was the phrase I almost shouted to my wife as I came running in, running and out of breath into the house. I told her she was right about the Bigfoot that morning on her hike. She folded her arms together, smiled, nodded up and down, and said the words every husband knows so well. "I told you so." And yes, Dave, it was followed by a half smile, smirk. I remember, too, that we actually laughed a bit. Yeah, I was still in shock and awe about everything, but I was laughing in a weird, hysterical way, yeah. But I was laughing and soon found myself finally relaxing and sharing what I'd seen over coffee with the love of my life, who was, again, right about everything. We still hike and walk that trail today, but never alone. We do sometimes hope to see it again. I know, sounds crazy to say that, but we do. And maybe one day we will. But that is our encounter story. Thanks, Mike.